Tonight I'm sharing a story that will shake you to your core about a mother's ultimate heartbreak and her incredible journey to reclaim her life. This is Cecilia's story, and I promise you've never heard anything quite like it. Before we dive in, please comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels around the world. Now, let me take you into a night that changed everything forever. The fluorescent lights in the ambulance flickered like dying stars as my world collapsed for the third time in 20 minutes. Each time my heart stopped, I felt myself slipping away into that cold, dark place where mothers go when they realize their children don't love them back. The paramedic's hands pressed against my chest, pumping life back into a body that wasn't sure it wanted to keep fighting. "We're losing her again," the young EMT shouted, his voice cutting through the siren's wail like a knife through my fading consciousness. But I wasn't thinking about dying. I was thinking about my sons, Isaac and Benjamin, and wondering if they would even care that their 67-year-old mother was fighting for her life in the back of an ambulance racing through the streets of Chicago at 11:30 on a Saturday night. My name is Cecilia Rosewood, and this is the story of how I died 3 times in one night, not from a heart attack, but from heartbreak so profound it nearly killed me. This is the story of how my own children taught me that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones who destroy you completely. But more importantly, this is the story of how I rose from the ashes of that destruction to build a life worth living. It started with a phone call that should have been routine but turned into a nightmare that would haunt me forever. "Mrs. Rosewood, this is Dr. Martinez from Northwestern Memorial Hospital," the voice said over my cell phone as I lay crumpled on my kitchen floor, my chest feeling like someone had wrapped steel cables around it and pulled tight. "The ambulance is on its way, but I need you to try to stay calm and keep breathing slowly." I had called 911 when the crushing pain in my chest became unbearable, when my left arm went numb and the room started spinning like a carnival ride. At 67, I knew the signs. This wasn't indigestion from the lonely dinner I'd eaten while watching the evening news. This was my heart giving up on me just like everything else in my life had. "Doctor," I managed to whisper into the phone, my voice barely audible over the sound of sirens growing closer. "Can you please call my sons? Isaac's number is 312-555-0847, and Benjamin is 312-555-0923. Tell them their mother needs them." "Of course, Mrs. Rosewood. We'll contact them immediately. Just focus on breathing for me. Okay?" The paramedics burst through my front door like heroes in a movie, and for a moment I felt hopeful. Someone was here to save me. Someone cared enough to rush to my rescue. Little did I know that the real emergency wasn't my failing heart, it was my failing family. As they loaded me into the ambulance, the lead paramedic, a kind-faced woman named Sarah, held my hand and said, "Your sons are being contacted now. I'm sure they'll meet us at the hospital." I nodded weakly, thinking about how Isaac and Benjamin would drop everything and race to be by my side. After all, hadn't I done the same for them countless times over the years? When Isaac broke his arm falling off his bike at age 8, I left work in the middle of an important meeting and drove 90 miles an hour to get to him. When Benjamin got food poisoning during his college finals, I drove 4 hours through a snowstorm to bring him homemade soup and sit by his bedside for 3 days. That's what mothers do. That's what family does. Or so I thought. My first heart attack hit as we turned onto Lakeshore Drive. The pain was indescribable, like someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed my heart with a fist made of ice and fire. The world went black, and for a few terrifying moments I was floating somewhere between life and death, watching my body convulse on the stretcher while Sarah worked frantically to bring me back. "Come on, Cecilia," she shouted, using the defibrillator paddles on my chest. "Don't you dare give up on me now." The electric shock jolted me back to consciousness, back to the fluorescent-lit hell of fighting for my life while wondering if anyone would even notice I was gone. "She's back," Sarah said with relief. "Hang in there, honey. We're almost there." But even as my heart started beating again, a terrible thought crept into my mind like poison. What if my sons don't come? What if they're too busy with their perfect lives, their perfect wives, their perfect excuses? I tried to push the thought away, but it clung to me like smoke, filling my lungs with doubt and fear. The second heart attack came as we pulled into the emergency room bay. This time the darkness lasted longer, and I found myself in that strange, quiet place where dying people go to decide whether to stay or fight. I could hear Sarah's voice from far away calling my name, begging me to come back, but I was so tired of fighting, so tired of hoping, so tired of loving people who didn't love me back. But something made me choose life. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the foolish hope that my sons would prove me wrong, that they would come running through those hospital doors with tears in their eyes and love in their hearts. Maybe I just wasn't ready to let them win. When I came back the second time, Dr. Martinez was standing beside my stretcher in the emergency room, his face grave and professional. Mrs. Rosewood, you've had 2 major cardiac episodes. We need to get you stabilized and into surgery immediately. Have your sons been contacted? Yes, Sarah said, squeezing my hand. The calls went out 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes. In 20 minutes, my sons could have driven halfway across the city to be with me. They could have been standing here right now, holding my hands, telling me everything would be okay. But they weren't. The third heart attack was the worst. It came as they wheeled me toward the cardiac unit, and this time I didn't just see the darkness, I embraced it. I was so tired of the pain, so tired of the disappointment, so tired of being a mother to children who had forgotten I existed. But just as I was about to let go completely, I heard Dr. Martinez on the phone in the hallway, and his words hit me like lightning. Isaac, this is Dr. Martinez at Northwestern Memorial. Your mother has had 3 heart attacks in the past hour. She's in critical condition, and we don't know if she'll make it through the night. You need to get here immediately. There was a pause, and then I heard the doctor's voice change, becoming sharp with disbelief. I'm sorry, what did you say? Another pause. You can't leave a party, sir. I need you to understand your mother is dying. This could be her last night. My heart, my poor damaged heart, somehow found the strength to break even more completely. A birthday party? Dr. Martinez's voice rose with anger. Sir, with all due respect, your mother's life is more important than any birthday party. She needs you here now. I couldn't hear Isaac's response, but I could imagine it. Cool, calm, logical Isaac, always so good at rationalizing his selfishness, always so skilled at making his cruelties sound reasonable. Dr. Martinez tried Benjamin next, and the conversation was even worse. Benjamin, your mother has had 3 heart attacks tonight. She's asking for you and your brother. Can you get to Northwestern Memorial immediately? The pause was longer this time, and when Dr. Martinez spoke again, his voice was filled with disgust. Diana's birthday party. Benjamin, your mother is dying. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Another pause. You'll come tomorrow if you have time. Sir, she might not be alive tomorrow. That's when I knew. Lying there on a hospital gurney with machines beeping around me and tubes running into my arms, I finally understood the truth that I had spent 40 years refusing to see. My sons didn't love me. They never had. I was nothing more to them than an obligation, a burden, an inconvenience that interfered with their real lives. Isaac couldn't leave Mella's party. The appetizers were just being served, and there were important clients there. Business contacts that might lead to new opportunities. How could he possibly explain to his wife that he needed to leave for his dying mother? Benjamin couldn't abandon Diana's birthday celebration. They had spent weeks planning it, had invited all their friends, had hired caterers and a DJ. How could he disappoint his wife by rushing off to the hospital for something that might not even be that serious? After all I had survived this long, surely I could survive one more night. Dr. Martinez returned to my bedside, his face a mixture of professional composure and personal outrage. Mrs. Rosewood, I've contacted your sons. They're aware of the situation. They're not coming, are they? Well, I whispered, though I already knew the answer. The doctor's silence was more eloquent than any words could have been. Mrs. Rosewood, I want you to know that you're going to receive the absolute best care we can provide. You don't need anyone else right now. You just need to focus on getting better. But as they wheeled me into the cardiac care unit and hooked me up to machines that would keep my broken heart beating, I realized that getting better wasn't just about surviving the night. It was about surviving the knowledge that the two people I had loved most in the world, the two people I had sacrificed everything for, couldn't be bothered to interrupt their social calendars for my death. As the nurses bustled around me checking monitors and adjusting IV drips, I closed my eyes and let myself remember. Not the good times, those were too painful now, but the pattern of disappointments that had led to this moment. The graduations I attended alone because they forgot to save me a seat with the family. The holidays when they showed up late and left early, always with somewhere more important to be. The grandchildren I barely knew because their parents were too busy to bring them around. "She's stable for now," I heard a nurse tell Dr. Martinez, "but the next 24 hours will be critical." Critical. That's what my whole life had been, critical moments when I needed my children, and they were always somewhere else, always with someone more important, always too busy for the woman who had given them everything. But lying there in that hospital bed with machines doing what my heart could barely manage on its own, I made a decision that would change everything. If I survived this night, if my broken heart could somehow keep beating without the love that had once sustained it, I was going to do something I had never done in 67 years of living. I was going to put myself first. The night stretched on like a nightmare that wouldn't end. Every few hours, a nurse would check on me, adjust my medications, ask if I needed anything. What I needed was for my sons to walk through that door, to take my hand, to tell me they were sorry for being so selfish and cruel. What I needed was for them to prove that 40 years of love and sacrifice hadn't been completely wasted. But they didn't come. At 3 in the morning, Dr. Martinez stopped by to check my progress. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Rosewood?" "Like I'm dying," I said, and I didn't just mean physically. "Your heart rhythm is stabilizing. That's a very good sign. We'll need to discuss some lifestyle changes and possibly surgery, but I think you're going to pull through this." "Doctor, can I ask you something?" "Of course. In your experience, when you call family members to tell them their loved one is dying, do they usually come?" Dr. Martinez sat down in the chair beside my bed, and I could see the sadness in his eyes. "Mrs. Rosewood, in 20 years of practicing medicine, I have never, and I mean never, had family members refuse to come to the hospital when told their loved one was dying. Your situation is unprecedented." The word hung in the air between us like a death sentence. Unprecedented. I was unprecedented in my own family's cruelty. "What does that make me?" I asked. "It makes you a woman who deserves better," he said simply, "and it makes them, well, it makes them people I hope I never have to understand." As dawn began to creep through the hospital room windows, painting everything in soft gray light, I realized that I had been given an unexpected gift. Not the gift of survival, though, that was precious too, but the gift of clarity. For the first time in my adult life, I could see my relationships with my sons exactly as they were, stripped of the illusions and excuses I had clung to for decades. They didn't love me. They had never loved me. I was useful to them when they needed money or help or someone to blame for their problems, but I wasn't a person to them. I was a function, a service, a convenience they took for granted. And I was done being convenient. Around 7 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Isaac calling from what sounded like a restaurant, his voice casual and unconcerned. "Hey, Mom, I heard you had some kind of episode last night. How are you feeling?" "Some kind of episode. 3 heart attacks, 3 times dying and coming back," and he called it some kind of episode. "I had 3 heart attacks, Isaac. I nearly died." "Oh, wow, that sounds serious. Well, I'm glad you're okay now. Listen, Mela and I are having brunch with some potential investors this morning, but maybe we can stop by later if we get a chance." If they got a chance. If viewing their dying mother fit into their schedule. "Isaac, I asked for you last night. I needed you." I know, Mom, and I'm sorry, but you have to understand this party was really important for my business. I couldn't just leave. You understand, right? No, I thought. I don't understand. I don't understand how a son can prioritize business contacts over his mother's life. I don't understand how someone can be so cold hearted that they consider a social event more important than a parent's final moments. Where are you now? I asked. We're at that new place in River North. The pancakes here are incredible. You should try it sometime. He was eating pancakes. While I lay in a cardiac care unit fighting for my life, my eldest son was eating pancakes and discussing the incredible food at some trendy restaurant. I have to go, I said, and hung up before he could respond. Benjamin called an hour later, and the conversation was even worse. Mom, I just heard about your heart thing. Are you feeling better? I had 3 heart attacks, Benjamin. Yikes. That's scary. But you're okay now, right? I mean, you sound okay. I sound okay because I'm on enough medication to tranquilize a horse, Benjamin. I nearly died last night. Well, thank God you didn't. Listen, I'm really sorry I couldn't make it to the hospital, but Diana's birthday party was just crazy. We had like 50 people there, and I was kind of the host, I couldn't just disappear. Your mother was dying. But you didn't die, right? So it worked out. Look, Diana and I are planning to swing by later today, probably after lunch. We might bring some flowers or something. After lunch, if it was convenient, if they didn't have anything better to do. Don't bother us, I said. What do you mean, well? I mean, don't bother coming. Don't bring flowers. Don't pretend you care. Mom, that's not fair. Of course we care. We're just busy people with responsibilities. And I'm your mother with a broken heart. Your heart is fine now, though, right? The doctors fixed it. That's when I realized he would never understand. Neither of them would ever understand that they hadn't just abandoned me in my moment of greatest need, they had killed something inside me that would never come back to life. Goodbye, Benjamin, I said, and turned off my phone. The rest of that day passed in a haze of medical consultations and lonely hours spent staring at the ceiling, thinking about the 40 years I had wasted loving people who were incapable of loving me back. The nurses were kind, Dr. Martinez was encouraging, and my heart grew stronger with each passing hour. But my faith in family, my belief in unconditional love, my hope that goodness would eventually be rewarded, those things were dead and buried victims of a night that had shown me the truth about the people I had raised. As evening approached, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. I was going to survive this heart attack, and I was going to use my survival to build a completely new life. A life where I mattered, a life where I came first, a life where the people around me chose to be there because they wanted to be, not because they were obligated by blood or guilt or need. My sons had taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who set you free. I was about to become the freest woman in Chicago, but first I had a letter to write. The letter began forming in my mind before the ink ever touched paper, each word carved from 40 years of memories that now felt like evidence in a trial I was finally ready to win. As the second night in the cardiac unit settled around me like a heavy blanket, I asked the night nurse for paper and a pen. Can't sleep, honey, she asked, her name tag reading Jennifer. She had kind eyes and gentle hands that reminded me of the mother I used to be back when I believed kindness was always returned. I need to write something important, I told her, something that's been waiting to be written for a very long time. Jennifer brought me a legal pad and a blue ballpoint pen, the kind that would leave permanent marks on more than just paper. She dimmed the lights to a soft glow and quietly went about her rounds, leaving me alone with 4 decades of pain that needed to find its way onto those yellow pages. I started with Isaac, my firstborn, the child who had made me a mother and taught me that love could be both infinite and unrequited. Isaac, I wrote, you were born on a Tuesday morning in March 3 weeks early because you were always impatient to get to the next thing. I held you for the first time and promised I would love you forever, no matter what. I kept that promise. You broke yours. The memories came flooding back like water through a broken dam, each one more painful than the last, because now I could see them clearly without the rose-colored glasses of a mother's hope. Isaac's first day of school, when he cried and clung to my leg, begging me not to leave him. "I'll be right here when you get out," I had promised, and I was. I was always right there. For every soccer game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference where his teachers praised him, and I glowed with pride thinking I was raising a good man. I remembered the night he came home from his first date, nervous and excited, telling me all about Sarah Mitchell and how she had let him hold her hand during the movie. We stayed up until 2 in the morning talking about love and relationships, and I shared stories about his father and me teaching him how to treat women with respect and kindness. Treat them the way you'd want someone to treat your mother. I had said, not knowing that someday he would treat his own mother as if she were disposable. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I wrote about the sacrifices, the 3 jobs I worked to put him through college because his father had died when Isaac was 16, leaving us with nothing but memories and medical bills. I cleaned offices at night, worked at a department store during the day, and did bookkeeping for small businesses on weekends, all so my brilliant boy could go to Northwestern and study business without drowning in debt. I wore the same coat for 5 years. I wrote because every extra dollar went to your education. When you graduated magna cum laude, I thought it was worth it. I thought I was investing in a son who would remember the woman who gave him everything. I was wrong. The words flowed easier now, as if they had been trapped inside me for years, waiting for this moment of reckoning. I wrote about the day Isaac called to tell me he was getting married to Mela Thornfield, daughter of a prominent Chicago real estate developer. I had been so excited to meet her, to welcome another daughter into our small family. I spent weeks planning the perfect dinner, researching her favorite foods, buying new dishes, transforming my modest dining room into something I hoped would impress her. The dinner was a disaster from the moment they walked through the door. Mela took one look at my little house in Pilsen, and I saw her nose wrinkle with distaste. She picked at the food I had spent 2 days preparing, made comments about the interesting decor, and spent most of the evening on her phone texting friends about more exciting plans. "Your mother tries so hard," I heard her whisper to Isaac as I cleared the dishes. "It's almost sad." Isaac didn't defend me. He just nodded and said, "She means well." That should have been my first warning that I was losing my son to a woman who saw me as nothing more than an embarrassment, a reminder of the modest life Isaac was trying to escape. I wrote about their wedding, how I was relegated to a table in the back with distant relatives I had never met, while Mela's family occupied the places of honor near the bride and groom. I had offered to help pay for the wedding, thinking it was what mothers do, and Isaac had accepted my offer without hesitation or gratitude. $5,000 from my meager savings money I had been setting aside for my own future went toward flowers and champagne that I barely got to see. "Thank you for your contribution," Mela had said, as if I were a business partner rather than the mother of the groom. Isaac said nothing at all. The memories kept coming, each one a tiny cut that had eventually bled me dry. The first grandchild who arrived after they had been married for 3 years. Little Emma with Isaac's dark eyes and Mela's stubborn chin. I fell in love with her the moment I saw her, this perfect little person who carried my son's DNA and my own hopes for redemption. But Mela controlled access to Emma like a prison warden, always finding reasons why visits needed to be rescheduled or cut short. The baby was napping or teething, or they had plans with Mela's family. When I did get to hold my granddaughter, it was always with Mela, hovering nearby, ready to reclaim her the moment Emma showed any signs of contentment in my arms. "She doesn't seem to like other people," Mela would say, as if my love for my granddaughter was somehow toxic. "She's very attached to me." Isaac never intervened, never stood up for my right to love my own grandchild. He had learned to keep peace with his wife by sacrificing everyone else, starting with the woman who had given him life. I wrote about the house, my little house in Pilsen that I had bought with my husband 40 years ago, where I had raised my boys and planned to live until I died. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the 80s, but it was mine. It was paid for, it was filled with memories, and it was the only security I had in the world. When Isaac decided he wanted to buy a bigger house in Lincoln Park, he came to me with his plan. He needed a down payment for his dream home, something befitting a successful businessman and his society wife. The bank required 20% down on a $800 $1,000 house, and Isaac was $60,000 short. "It's an investment, Mom," he had said, sitting at my kitchen table with a folder full of real estate listings. "Property values are going up every year. We'll make money on this." "What does that have to do with me?" I had asked, though part of me already knew where the conversation was heading. "Well, this house is worth about $150,000 now. If you sold it and moved into a smaller place, you could give us the money we need and still have enough left over for a nice little condo somewhere." A nice little condo somewhere. As if my home, the place where I had loved and laughed and cried and dreamed, was just a commodity to be liquidated for his benefit. "Isaac, this is my home." "I know, Mom, but you don't really need all this space, do you? And think about it, you'd be helping me build a better future for Emma. Don't you want your granddaughter to grow up in a nice neighborhood?" The implication was clear. If I truly loved my granddaughter, I would sacrifice my home for her benefit. If I refused, I was being selfish, putting my own comfort ahead of family. I sold the house. I signed the papers and watched strangers walk through the rooms where I had raised my children, and I moved into a 1 bedroom apartment in a building that smelled like disinfectant and loneliness. Isaac got his dream house, Mela got her status symbol, and I got a cramped apartment with thin walls and no memories. "Thank you, Mom," Isaac had said when I handed him the check. "This really means a lot to us." It meant everything to me, but I don't think he ever understood that. Benjamin's story was different, but somehow worse because he had always been my baby, the one who needed me more, the one I thought would never forget where he came from. "Benjamin," I wrote on a new page, "you were born during a thunderstorm, and I used to think that meant you would be passionate and intense and full of life. I was right about the storm, but wrong about what kind of storm you would become. Benjamin had been my artistic child, the one who painted beautiful pictures and wrote poetry in high school. He was sensitive and emotional, quick to tears, and even quicker to laughter. When other mothers complained about their difficult teenagers, I felt lucky to have a son who still hugged me in public and told me about his feelings. He went to art school on partial scholarship with me, making up the difference by taking on extra work and eating pasta for dinner 6 nights a week. I believed in his talent and his dreams of becoming a successful artist who would paint murals and sell his work in galleries. I hung his paintings on every wall of my little house, turning it into a shrine to his creativity. But art didn't pay the bills, and after graduation, Benjamin struggled to find his place in the world. He moved back home for what he promised would be just a few months until he could save enough money to get his own place and start his career. Those few months turned into 2 years. 2 years of watching my grown son sleep until noon, play video games until dawn, and make half-hearted attempts at finding work that didn't conflict with his artistic vision. He was waiting for the right opportunity, he said. He was building his portfolio. He was networking with other artists. What he was really doing was hiding from adulthood while I enabled his retreat. I paid for his food, his clothes, his art supplies. I made excuses for him when people asked why a 24-year-old man was still living with his mother. I defended his choices and his timeline even as I watched my savings account dwindle and my own dreams fade away. "He's an artist," I would tell my friends. "Artists mature differently. He just needs time to find himself." The truth was, I was afraid that if I pushed him too hard, I would lose him completely. Benjamin was my emotional child, the one who wore his heart on his sleeve, and I was terrified that disappointment would break him. So I cushioned every blow, smoothed every path, and slowly taught him that he would never have to face consequences because his mother would always be there to catch him when he fell. It was the worst gift I ever gave him. When Benjamin finally did move out, it was because he had met Diana Westbrook at a coffee shop in Wicker Park. Diana was everything I was not: sophisticated, connected, ambitious. Her father owned a chain of upscale restaurants, and she had grown up in a world where money solved problems and connections opened doors. Diana saw potential in Benjamin that I had been unable to unlock. She pushed him to apply for jobs, network with her father's business associates, and channel his creativity into more commercial ventures. Within 6 months of meeting her, Benjamin had a job at an advertising agency and a newfound confidence in his abilities. I should have been grateful to Diana for motivating my son, but instead I felt replaced. The woman who had spent years nurturing Benjamin's dreams was suddenly unnecessary, a relic of his unfocused past. Diana represented his future, and that future apparently had no room for the mother who had made it possible. Their courtship was a whirlwind of expensive restaurants and weekend trips to Diana's family cabin in Wisconsin. Benjamin called me less frequently, visited even more rarely, and when he did come by my apartment, he seemed impatient to leave, always checking his phone for messages from Diana. "She's really helping me grow as a person, Mom," he told me one Sunday afternoon over lunch. "She challenges me to be better." The implication was that I had never challenged him, that I had somehow held him back by loving him unconditionally. Maybe he was right, but it still hurt to realize that my son saw my devotion as a weakness rather than a strength. When Benjamin proposed to Diana, he asked her father for permission, but didn't tell me about the engagement until after she had already called her friends and posted the news on social media. I found out that my youngest son was getting married when one of my neighbors saw the announcement online and congratulated me. "I was going to call you," Benjamin said when I confronted him about it. "I just wanted to make sure all the details were worked out first." "What details? You're engaged. What other details matter?" "Well, we're thinking about having the wedding at Diana's family's country club, and we weren't sure about the guest list yet." The guest list. As if inviting his own mother to his wedding was something that needed to be carefully considered and discussed. I wrote about their wedding, which was even more elaborate than Isaac's had been. Diana's parents spared no expense transforming their country club into a fairy tale setting with flowers flown in from Oregon and a 10-piece orchestra that played during dinner. I wore the nicest dress I owned, a navy blue number I had bought for Isaac's wedding 3 years earlier, and tried to feel like I belonged among the 200 guests who had come to celebrate my son's new life. But I didn't belong, and everyone knew it. I was seated at a table with Diana's elderly great-aunt's women, who spent the entire evening complaining about the music being too loud and the portions being too small. Benjamin was too busy greeting Diana's friends and business associates to spend more than 5 minutes with me, and when he did stop by my table, the conversation was stilted and awkward. "Thanks for coming, Mom," he said, as if I were a casual acquaintance rather than the woman who had given him life. "Where else would I be?" I replied, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. I know. It's just been such a crazy day. Diana's really stressed about everything being perfect." Diana's stress mattered more than his mother's feelings. That should have told me everything I needed to know about how our relationship had changed, but I was still clinging to the hope that marriage would mature my son, that becoming a husband would help him remember the importance of family. Instead, marriage made him disappear even more completely into a world where I didn't exist. Benjamin and Diana bought a condo in River North with help from her parents, and they filled it with expensive furniture and art that reflected Diana's sophisticated taste. When I visited for the first time, I felt like a tourist in a museum, afraid to touch anything or sit on the white leather sofa that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. "It's beautiful," I told Diana, who gave me a tour of their home with the pride of someone showing off a prized possession. "Thank you," she replied. We wanted something that reflected our lifestyle. Their lifestyle. Not Benjamin's lifestyle or their lifestyle together, but a collective identity that had apparently formed without any input from the woman who had shaped the first 26 years of Benjamin's life. The business disaster came 2 years after their wedding. Benjamin had been working at the advertising agency for 3 years, slowly building a reputation as a creative director with fresh ideas and strong client relationships. But Benjamin had always been a dreamer, and working for someone else felt limiting to his artistic spirit. Diana encouraged him to start his own agency, using her family connections to attract initial clients and secure startup funding. It seemed like the perfect plan. Benjamin would have creative control, Diana would handle the business side, and they would build something together that reflected both their strengths. When Benjamin came to me asking for financial backing, I should have said no. I should have protected the little bit of security I had left after giving Isaac the money for his house. But Benjamin was my baby, and when he looked at me with those earnest brown eyes and talked about his dreams of creative independence, I melted like I always did. "It's not a gift, Mom," he assured me. "It's an investment. You'll get your money back with interest once we're established." Diana's dad says the market for boutique creative agencies is really strong right now. $25,000. My entire emergency fund, the money I'd been saving for unexpected medical expenses or home repairs or any of the 100 things that could go wrong in the life of an elderly woman living alone. I wrote the check and handed it to my son, trusting that he would honor his promise to pay me back once his business took off. The agency lasted 18 months. Benjamin and Diana had great creative vision, but no practical experience running a business. They spent too much on office space and equipment, hired too many employees too quickly, and took on clients who looked impressive on paper but were slow to pay their bills. When the economy slowed down and businesses started cutting their marketing budgets, Benjamin's agency was one of the first expenses to be eliminated. "We're going to have to close down, Mom," Benjamin told me over coffee at a diner near my apartment. He looked exhausted and defeated, older than his 28 years. "We just can't make the numbers work anymore." "What about my money?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I'm really sorry, but there's nothing left. We had to pay the employees their final paychecks and cover the lease cancellation fees. I promise I'll pay you back as soon as I find another job." $25,000 gone. My safety net, my peace of mind, my security in old age vanished into Benjamin's failed dreams and poor planning. And instead of being grateful for my sacrifice, instead of acknowledging the magnitude of what I had lost, Benjamin seemed to expect me to be understanding about his predicament. "These things happen in business, Vay," he said, as if losing my life savings was just part of the natural order of things. Diana's dad says it was a good learning experience, and a learning experience that cost me everything and taught him nothing about responsibility or gratitude. The memories were coming faster now, each one another nail in the coffin of my illusions about my sons. I wrote about the Sunday dinners that became monthly dinners, that became holiday-only dinners that eventually became nothing at all. I wrote about the phone calls that went from daily to weekly to whenever they needed something from me. I wrote about the grandchildren I barely knew. Isaac and Mella had 2 more children after Emma, twin boys named Carter and Connor, who looked like miniature versions of their father but had inherited their mother's coldness. Benjamin and Diana had a daughter they named Sophia, a beautiful little girl with Benjamin's artistic sensitivity and Diana's sharp intelligence. But I was a stranger to these children, an elderly woman who showed up occasionally with presents and awkward hugs. Mella had made it clear that she preferred to keep Emma's world small and controlled, which didn't include a grandmother who lived in a modest apartment and worked retail to make ends meet. Diana was more diplomatic but equally exclusionary, always finding polite reasons why visits needed to be brief or rescheduled. "The children have such busy schedules," Diana would say. "Between school and activities and playdates, we barely have time to breathe." But they had time for Diana's parents, who were regular fixtures in Sophia's life. They had time for Mela's family, who were invited to every birthday party and holiday celebration. They just didn't have time for me. I wrote about the job I had to take at Macy's when my savings ran out, how humiliating it felt to stand on my feet for 8 hours a day, helping customers who were often younger than my own sons. The other employees were kind enough, but they all had families to go home to, grandchildren who called them on the phone, children who remembered their birthdays without being reminded. I wrote about the loneliness that had become my constant companion, the way silence filled my apartment like a living thing pressing against my chest and making it hard to breathe. I wrote about eating dinner alone every night, watching television shows that couldn't fill the emptiness where my family used to be. I wrote about the holidays that became exercises in endurance. Isaac and Benjamin would extend obligatory invitations to their family celebrations, and I would spend an hour or two sitting in the corner of their beautiful homes, watching their wives play hostess to people who actually mattered to them. I was the duty guest, the obligation they checked off their list so they could tell themselves they were good sons. "Thanks for coming, Mom," they would say as I prepared to leave. "It was great having you." But it wasn't great for anyone. I was a reminder of their humble origins, a living contradiction to the successful personas they had constructed for themselves and their friends. My presence made them uncomfortable, and their discomfort made me feel invisible. The pen was running out of ink, but I wasn't finished. I still had to write about the pattern that had emerged over the years, the way every crisis in their lives became an opportunity for me to prove my love by sacrificing a little more of myself. When Isaac's business hit a rough patch and he couldn't make his mortgage payments for 3 months, guess who he called? When Benjamin needed money for Diana's engagement ring, who did he turn to? When both of them wanted to take expensive vacations but couldn't afford them? Who was expected to watch their children for free while they recharged their batteries in places I would never see? I was their bank, their babysitter, their safety net, their scapegoat. I was everything except what I most wanted to be, their beloved mother. The worst part wasn't the money or the favors or even the constant disappointments. The worst part was the way they had trained me to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. A 5-minute phone call became a gift. A brief visit became a reason for celebration. An invitation to a family gathering became validation that I still mattered. I had become pathetically grateful for the privilege of being tolerated by my own children, but not anymore. Lying in that hospital bed reviewing 40 years of evidence, I finally saw the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. My sons were not good men who were too busy to appreciate their mother. They were selfish, entitled users who had learned that they could take anything they wanted from me without giving anything in return. They had become men who could justify leaving their dying mother alone in a hospital so they wouldn't miss a party. They had become people who valued social obligations more than family love, who considered their mother's life less important than their wives' birthday celebrations. They had become strangers wearing my children's faces. As I wrote the final paragraphs of my letter, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years' clarity. The fog of guilt and self-doubt that had clouded my judgment for decades was finally lifting, and I could see my situation exactly as it was. I was a 67-year-old woman who had spent her entire adult life loving people who didn't love her back. I had given away my home, my savings, my security, and my dignity to children who saw my sacrifices as their due. I had enabled their selfishness, funded their dreams, and asked for nothing in return except the basic courtesy that any decent person would show to a stranger. I hadn't even gotten that, but I was still alive, and for the first time in 40 years, I was going to use my life for something that mattered. I was going to build a world where I was valued, where I was wanted, where I was more than just a convenient resource to be exploited when needed and ignored when not. Jennifer checked on me around 4 in the morning and found me still writing by the soft light of the bedside lamp. "Honey, you need to get some rest," she said gently. "Your heart needs time to heal." "My heart is already healing," I told her, and I meant it in ways she couldn't possibly understand. I finished the letter as the sun came up, signing my name with the same pen I had used to write checks for my son's dreams and disappointments. But this time I was writing something for myself, a declaration of independence from a family that had never truly been a family at all. The letter was 12 pages long, single-spaced, written in the careful handwriting my mother had taught me 70 years ago when I was learning to form letters on lined paper. It was the longest thing I had ever written and the most honest. When I was finished, I read it over one more time, checking for accuracy and completeness. Every word was true. Every memory was exact. Every conclusion was supported by decades of evidence that I had been too blind to see clearly until now. I folded the letter carefully and sealed it in an envelope that Jennifer had brought me when she realized I was writing something important. On the outside, I wrote simply, Isaac and Benjamin Rosewood. Inside was everything they had never bothered to learn about their mother, that I was a person with feelings and dreams and needs of my own, that I had sacrificed everything for children who had given me nothing in return, and that I was finally done trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. The letter was my resignation from the job of being their mother. After 67 years of service, I was retiring. But first I had to figure out what came next. The letter sat sealed on my bedside table for 3 days like a loaded gun waiting for the right moment to fire. During those 3 days, something remarkable happened. Isaac and Benjamin finally showed up at the hospital, but not because they were worried about their dying mother. They came because Dr. Martinez had called them again this time with a tone that made it clear their absence was being noted by the entire medical staff. Mom, Isaac breezed into my room on Wednesday afternoon carrying a small bouquet of grocery store flowers that still had the price tag attached. You look so much better. See, I told Mela you were stronger than you looked. Behind him, Benjamin shuffled in with Diana, both of them, checking their phones as if more important matters were demanding their attention even here, even now. We brought you some flowers, Diana announced, as if she had personally selected each bloom instead of grabbing the cheapest arrangement from the hospital gift shop on their way up from the parking garage. I looked at my sons, really looked at them, and saw them clearly for perhaps the first time in their adult lives. Isaac in his expensive suit, perfectly pressed and tailored to project success and authority. Benjamin in his designer jeans and artfully casual shirt, the uniform of creative professionals who wanted to appear approachable while maintaining their status. Both of them handsome, successful, well-dressed men who had learned to navigate the world with confidence and charm. Both of them strangers. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Benjamin asked, pulling out his phone to check a text message even as the words left his mouth. "Like I died and came back to life 3 times," I said, watching their faces for any sign that they understood the weight of what I had just said. Isaac laughed, actually laughed as if I had made a joke. "Well, you've always been dramatic. Remember when you thought you were having a heart attack during my high school graduation? Turned out to be acid reflux." The casual dismissal of my pain, the reduction of my near-death experience to family mythology about my supposed tendency toward hyperbole, it was exactly the kind of response I should have expected from them, but it still hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't acid reflux, Isaac. I coded 3 times in the ambulance. Coded. Diana looked confused as if medical emergencies were foreign concepts that didn't happen to people in her social circle. "It means I died, I said flatly. 3 times. My heart stopped and they had to shock me back to life. For a moment, silence filled the room. I watched their faces, hoping to see some flicker of understanding, some recognition that they had almost lost their mother forever and had chosen a party over being with me in what could have been my final moments. Instead, I saw discomfort and impatience. "Well, thank God you're okay now," Benjamin said, glancing at Diana, who was clearly ready to leave. "The important thing is that you pulled through." "Is it?" I asked. "Is that really the important thing?" "Of course it is, Mom," Isaac replied, his tone suggesting that I was being unreasonable. "What else would be important? What else would be important?" As if the fact that they had abandoned me to die alone was irrelevant now that I had survived, despite their neglect. "Where were you?" I asked quietly. "What do you mean? When Dr. Martinez called you and told you I was dying, where were you?" Isaac shifted uncomfortably, loosening his tie as if it had suddenly become too tight. Benjamin looked at the floor, and Diana started scrolling through her phone with renewed interest. "We were at Mella's party," Isaac said finally. "I explained this to you already. It was an important business event." "And you," I turned to Benjamin. "Diana's birthday," he mumbled. "We had 50 people there, Mom. We couldn't just leave." "You couldn't leave to watch your mother die." "You didn't die, though," Mella interjected from the doorway where she had been standing silently since they arrived. Her voice was sharp and defensive, as if I were attacking her personally by questioning their priorities. "So really, everything worked out fine." Everything worked out fine. My heart attack, my terror, my realization that I was completely alone in the world, all of it was fine because I had survived to tell the tale. "Did it work out fine?" I asked, looking directly at Mella, this woman who had systematically separated my son from his family and convinced him that his mother was an embarrassment to be managed rather than a person to be loved. "Well, yes," she said, blinking rapidly, as if my question were somehow inappropriate. "You're alive, you're recovering, and we're all here now. What more do you want? What more did I want? After 40 years of giving everything I had to these people after nearly dying alone because they couldn't be bothered to leave their social obligations, what more could I possibly want? I want you to leave," I said. The words came out calm and clear, surprising even me with their certainty. "What?" Isaac looked genuinely confused, as if the concept of his mother not wanting to see him was completely foreign. "I want all of you to leave my room. Now." "Mom, you're obviously upset," Benjamin said, using the patronizing tone he had perfected over the years whenever I expressed any emotion that inconvenienced him. "You've been through a traumatic experience. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in 40 years. Look," Diana said, stepping forward with the fake smile she used when dealing with difficult clients. "We understand you're disappointed that we couldn't get here immediately, but you have to understand that we have responsibilities. Get out." "Mrs. Rosewood," Mella tried to interject, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Get out." The words exploded out of me with a force that surprised everyone in the room, including myself. For 67 years, I had swallowed my anger, buried my resentment, and smiled through my pain because good mothers don't make scenes. Good mothers don't raise their voices. Good mothers accept whatever their children are willing to give them and ask for nothing more. But I was done being a good mother to bad children. "You heard her," said a voice from the doorway. We all turned to see Jennifer, the night nurse who had brought me the paper for my letter. She was standing in the entrance to my room with her arms crossed and a look on her face that could have frozen fire. "The patient has requested that you leave. Hospital policy requires that you comply immediately." "Now wait just a minute." Isaac began his business persona kicking in as he prepared to negotiate his way out of an uncomfortable situation. "No, sir," Jennifer cut him off. "There is no waiting. Your mother has asked you to leave, and you're going to leave. Right now." Behind Jennifer, I could see Dr. Martinez approaching with 2 security guards. Word had apparently spread through the cardiac unit that something was happening in room 314, and the staff had rallied to protect their patient from whatever was upsetting her. "Mom," Benjamin said, his voice taking on a pleading quality I hadn't heard since he was a child. "Please don't do this. We're family." "No," I said, looking at him with eyes that finally saw him clearly, "we're not." The security guards escorted my sons and their wives out of my room while they protested their innocence and demanded to speak to someone in authority. I could hear Isaac's voice echoing down the hallway as he threatened to call his lawyer, as if my decision to protect myself from further emotional abuse was somehow illegal. Dr. Martinez lingered in my doorway after they were gone, studying me with the careful attention he usually reserved for EKG readings. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Rosewood?" "Lighter," I said, and realized it was true. The weight I had been carrying for decades, the weight of trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it, had suddenly lifted from my shoulders. "Good," he said simply. Your blood pressure just dropped 15 points. That afternoon, I called my cousin Linda in Dallas, Texas. Linda was my father's sister's daughter, 5 years older than me, and the closest thing to a best friend I had left in the world. We had kept in touch through Christmas cards and occasional phone calls over the years, but distance and busy lives had prevented us from being as close as we had been as children. Linda's voice was warm and familiar when she answered the phone, carrying the slight Texas drawl she had picked up during 40 years of living in Dallas. Cecilia. What a lovely surprise. How are you, honey? I'm in the hospital, I said, cutting straight to the heart of things because I was too old and too tired to dance around difficult subjects. Oh my God, what happened? Are you okay? I told her everything. The heart attacks, the abandoned phone calls, the party that was more important than my life. I told her about the letter I had written, the confrontation with my sons, and the decision I was slowly making to disappear from their lives completely. Linda listened without interruption, making small sounds of sympathy and outrage in all the right places. When I finished talking, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Cecilia, she said finally, do you remember what my grandmother used to say about fruit trees? No, what? She used to say that if you spend your whole life fertilizing a tree and it never bears fruit at some point, you have to stop wasting fertilizer and plant something new. I started crying, then not the bitter tears of anger and disappointment I had shed over my sons, but the cleaner tears of recognition and relief. Someone understood. Someone saw what I had been trying to grow in the barren soil of my children's hearts and acknowledged that it was never going to bloom. Linda, I said through my tears, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that it's okay to say no. Ask me anything, honey. I need to disappear. I need to go somewhere my sons can't find me, somewhere I can start over and figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be their mother. Do you think, would it be possible for me to come stay with you for a while, just until I can figure out what comes next? Oh, Cecilia, Linda said, her voice thick with emotion. You pack whatever you can carry and you get yourself to Dallas as soon as the doctors will let you travel. My house is your house for as long as you need it. I don't have much money, Saad. I don't care about money. I care about you. And honey, I've got to tell you, I've been lonely since Robert passed last year. Having you here might be good for both of us. Robert was Linda's husband of 38 years, a gentle man who had treated me with more kindness during brief holiday visits than my own sons had shown me in decades. I had forgotten that Linda was dealing with her own grief, her own loneliness, her own need for family connection. Maybe we could help each other heal. Linda, there's something else. I'm going to leave them a letter, and after that, I'm never going to contact them again. I'm going to become someone they can't find, can't manipulate, can't disappoint. Are you prepared for that? Because once I make this choice, there's no going back. Honey, Linda said firmly, some bridges are meant to be burned. Sounds to me like you should have lit the match years ago. That evening, Jennifer helped me make the arrangements for my escape. I use that word deliberately, escape, because that's what it was. I was fleeing from a life that had become a prison, breaking free from relationships that had slowly strangled my spirit over 40 years of disappointment. Jennifer had worked in cardiac care for 15 years, and she had seen every kind of family crisis imaginable. She had watched devoted children maintain bedside vigils for parents who had been cruel to them their entire lives, and she had watched loving parents die alone because their successful children were too busy to visit. But I've never seen anything quite like your situation, she told me as we sat in my room planning my departure. Most family dysfunction has some element of love mixed in with the damage. What I saw today was just coldness. She was right. There had been no love in my room that afternoon, no genuine concern for my well-being, no recognition that they had almost lost someone who had devoted her entire life to their happiness. There had been only irritation that I was making their lives more complicated by having the audacity to nearly die at an inconvenient time. Jennifer helped me contact the hospital's social services department to arrange for my discharge directly to the bus station. She helped me withdraw money from my checking account using the hospital's ATM. She even offered to drive me to the Greyhound station herself on her own time because she said she wanted to make sure I got safely started on my new life. "Why are you doing all this for me?" I asked her as we finalized the details of my departure. "Because," she said, "everyone deserves to be loved. And if your own family won't love you, then maybe it's time to go find the family that will." The bus ticket to Dallas cost $127, leaving me with just over $3,000 in cash money I'd been saving for emergencies that never seemed to come. This felt like the ultimate emergency, the emergency of a life unlived, of love unreturned, of dreams deferred until they had almost died completely. Dr. Martinez was initially reluctant to discharge me so soon after such a serious cardiac event, but when I explained my situation carefully clinically, without the emotional drama that might make him question my mental state, he agreed that removing stress from my life was probably the best medicine I could take. "Mrs. Rosewood, he said as he signed my discharge papers, "I want you to know that in 20 years of practicing medicine, I have never seen a patient make such a dramatic recovery from such a severe emotional trauma. Your heart is healing remarkably well, and I think that's directly related to the decisions you're making about your future." "You mean leaving my family?" "I mean choosing yourself," he corrected gently. "For the first time, it seems like you're choosing yourself." He was right. For 67 years, I had chosen everyone else first. I had chosen my husband's comfort over my own dreams when we were young. I had chosen my children's needs over my own security when they were growing up. I had chosen their wives' approval over my own dignity when they got married. I had chosen their financial stability over my own retirement when they needed money. But now, finally, I was choosing Cecilia Rosewood, not as somebody's wife, not as somebody's mother, not as somebody's obligation or convenience or disappointment, just as me, a woman who deserved better than she had been getting and was finally brave enough to go look for it. The night before my departure, I made one final addition to my letter. I wanted to make sure my sons understood that this wasn't an impulsive decision made in the heat of anger, but a carefully considered choice based on decades of evidence that our relationship was irreparably broken. "By the time you read this," I wrote in my careful handwriting, "I will be gone, not just from this hospital, but from your lives completely. I have realized that I cannot continue to love people who are incapable of loving me back, and I cannot continue to sacrifice myself for children who see my sacrifices as their due rather than my gift." I sealed the letter again and left it on my bedside table where it would be impossible to miss when they came looking for me, because they would come looking not because they loved me, but because losing control over me would be unacceptable to their sense of order and propriety. They would want to know where I had gone, not so they could follow me with apologies and changed hearts, but so they could continue to manage me from a distance, keep me available for future emergencies and financial needs. But I would be beyond their reach finally and forever. Jennifer picked me up at 6 o'clock on Friday morning before the shift change that would bring new nurses who might ask questions about why a cardiac patient was leaving the hospital with a suitcase instead of a family member. We drove through the quiet streets of Chicago as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, and I looked at the city where I had spent my entire life with the eyes of someone seeing it for the last time. I felt no nostalgia, no regret, no sentimental attachment to the places where I had been so unhappy for so long. The Chicago that was disappearing in Jennifer's rearview mirror wasn't my home. It was my prison, and I was finally breaking free. "Are you nervous?" Jennifer asked as we pulled into the Greyhound station parking lot. "No," I said, surprised by how calm I felt. "I'm excited." And I was. For the first time in decades, I was excited about my future instead of dreading it. I didn't know what was waiting for me in Dallas, but I knew it couldn't be worse than what I was leaving behind. Jennifer walked me to the bus and helped me store my single suitcase in the luggage compartment. Everything I owned that mattered to me fit into one medium-sized suitcase. Some clothes, a few photographs from happier times, my important documents, and the small jewelry box my mother had given me when I got married. Everything else, the furniture in my apartment, the dishes I had bought for family dinners that never happened, the photo albums full of pictures of children who had forgotten I existed, could stay behind. Material possessions had never brought me happiness, and I was finally old enough to understand that they never would. "Take care of yourself, Cecilia," Jennifer said as I climbed the steps into the bus. "And remember, you're not running away from your problems. You're running toward your solution." I found a window seat near the back of the bus and settled in for the 18-hour journey to my new life. As the bus pulled out of the station and merged into the morning traffic heading south, I pressed my hand against the cool window and whispered goodbye to the woman I had been for 67 years. That woman had tried so hard to be everything to everyone that she had forgotten to be anything to herself. She had loved so deeply and so completely that she had emptied herself out, leaving nothing but a hollow shell that existed only to serve other people's needs. But that woman was gone now, left behind in a hospital room with a letter that would shatter her children's comfortable illusions about their perfect lives and their convenient mother. The woman on this bus was someone new, someone I was just beginning to meet. She was brave enough to walk away from everything familiar, strong enough to start over at an age when most people were settling into the patterns that would carry them to their graves, and wise enough to know that love without reciprocity is just elaborate self-destruction. As the bus carried me through the Illinois countryside toward a future I couldn't yet imagine, I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time I had felt genuinely happy. Not grateful, not resigned, not satisfied with whatever scraps of attention my children threw my way, but truly, deeply happy. I couldn't remember. The realization should have made me sad, but instead it filled me with determination. If I couldn't remember being happy, then I had nothing to lose by completely changing my life. If the past 67 years hadn't brought me joy, then maybe the next 20 years could be different. Maybe it wasn't too late to become the person I had always been meant to be before I got lost in the maze of other people's expectations and demands. Maybe Cecilia Rosewood's real life was just beginning. The bus rolled on through the changing landscape, carrying me toward Dallas and Linda and the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of starting over. Behind me, Chicago grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely, taking with it the woman who had tried so hard to love the wrong people. Ahead of me lay Texas and heat and whatever came after heartbreak when you finally find the courage to heal. I was 67 years old and I was finally free. The Texas heat hit me like a warm embrace when I stepped off the bus in Dallas. 18 hours later, my legs shaky from the long journey, but my spirit stronger than it had been in decades. Linda was waiting for me at the gate, her silver hair catching the afternoon sunlight, and her face lit up with a smile that made me remember what it felt like to be genuinely welcomed somewhere. "Cecilia," she called out, rushing toward me with arms wide open. When she hugged me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the comfort of being truly wanted by someone who chose to love me rather than someone who was obligated to tolerate me. "You made it," she whispered against my ear, holding me tight. "You actually made it." "I can't believe I'm here," I said and meant it. 24 hours ago, I had been lying in a hospital bed in Chicago, surrounded by the wreckage of relationships that had slowly poisoned my life. Now I was standing in a bus station in Dallas, holding on to the cousin who had offered me refuge without asking for anything in return. "Come on," Linda said, taking my suitcase with one hand and my arm with the other. "Let's get you home." Home. The word felt foreign on my tongue, like a language I had forgotten how to speak. For 40 years, home had been wherever my children needed me to be, whatever space I could occupy without inconveniencing their real lives. But as Linda led me to her car, chattering excitedly about all the things she wanted to show me and the people she wanted me to meet, I began to understand that home might actually be a place where I was wanted rather than endured. Linda lived in a small ranch house in a neighborhood called Lake Highlands, where the streets were lined with mature oak trees, and the houses had front porches where neighbors actually sat and talked to each other. Her house was painted yellow with white trim, and the front yard was a riot of flowers that bloomed in defiance of the Texas heat. Robert planted most of these, Linda said, as we walked up the front path, gesturing to the explosion of color around us. He said if we were going to live in a place where it was hot enough to melt asphalt, we might as well have something beautiful to look at. The inside of her house was cool and welcoming, decorated with the accumulated treasures of a long, happy marriage. Family photos covered every surface, not arranged for show like decorations, but scattered around like evidence of lives well lived and love freely given. "This is your room," Linda said, opening the door to a sunny bedroom at the back of the house. "It's got its own bathroom and a little sitting area where you can have privacy when you need it." The room was perfect, furnished with antiques that had stories attached to them and windows that looked out onto a backyard garden where hummingbirds darted between feeders like tiny miracles. It was more welcoming than any space my own sons had ever offered me in their beautiful homes. "Linda, I can't thank you enough." "Stop right there," she interrupted, holding up a hand. "We're family, Cecilia. Family takes care of family. That's how it's supposed to work. That's how it's supposed to work." Such a simple concept, but one that had been completely foreign in my relationship with my own children. That first evening, Linda and I sat on her back porch drinking iced tea and watching the sun set over her garden, talking in the easy way that only people who have known each other forever can talk. She told me about her life since Robert's death, how she had struggled with loneliness and purposelessness after losing the man who had been her companion for nearly 4 decades. "I kept his coffee cup in the cabinet for 6 months," she said, laughing at herself, "like he might come back and need it. Finally, my neighbor Margaret made me put it away. She said Robert wouldn't want me turning into a museum curator for our marriage." "How do you do it?" I asked. "How do you move forward after losing someone you love so much?" "You remember that love isn't something you lose when the person is gone," Linda said thoughtfully. "Love is something you carry with you. The difference is that Robert's love was real, so it sustains me even though he's not here. But Cecilia, honey, you can't carry love that was never really there in the first place." Her words hit me like lightning, illuminating a truth I had been afraid to acknowledge. The love I thought I was carrying for my sons, the grief I thought I was feeling at losing them, none of it was real because their love for me had never been real. I had been mourning the death of something that had never actually been alive. I'd been grieving a fantasy, I said, the realization washing over me like cool water. "Yes, you have. And that's the hardest kind of grief to get over because you have to let go of not just what you lost, but what you thought you had in the first place." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching fireflies begin to blink in the growing darkness. For the first time in years, silence felt peaceful instead of oppressive. "Linda," I said finally, "what do I do now I'm 67 years old? I have no career, no real savings, no idea who I am when I'm not trying to be someone's mother. How do I start over?" "One day at a time," she said simply. "And you start by remembering that 67 isn't dead, it's just experienced. You've got wisdom now, Cecilia, you've got perspective, and most importantly, you've got nothing left to lose, which makes you more powerful than you realize." Over the following days, Linda introduced me to her world, and I began to understand what it meant to be part of a community where people genuinely cared about each other's well-being. Her neighbor Margaret brought over a casserole and stayed for coffee, asking real questions about my life and listening to the answers with genuine interest. The woman who ran the corner store remembered my name after one visit and asked how I was settling in every time I stopped by. These were strangers who treated me with more consideration than my own children had shown me in years. Linda belonged to a book club that met every Thursday evening at the local library, and she invited me to come along to their discussion of a novel about women starting over after divorce. The group was made up of 8 women ranging in age from 55 to 78, and they welcomed me into their circle without reservation or judgment. "We've all reinvented ourselves at least once," said Dorothy, a elegant woman in her early 70s who had gone back to school to become a nurse after her husband left her for a younger woman. "It's never too late to become who you were meant to be." "I don't know who I was meant to be," I admitted. "I've been somebody's daughter, somebody's wife, somebody's mother for so long that I've forgotten if there was ever just a me underneath all those roles." "Then this is your chance to find out," said Rose, a tiny woman with bright pink hair who had started her own catering business at age 62 after her children grew up. "The nice thing about starting over later in life is that you don't have to waste time on things that don't matter. You can focus on figuring out what brings you joy." Joy. Another word that felt foreign, like a concept I had read about but never experienced firsthand. That night, I lay in my comfortable bed in Linda's guest room and tried to remember the last time I had done something purely because it made me happy, not because it served someone else's needs or fulfilled someone else's expectations. The memory was so distant, it might have been from another lifetime. In Chicago, my days had been structured around other people's schedules and requirements. I worked retail hours that exhausted me, spent my free time running errands or cooking meals for family members who barely thanked me, and filled my evenings with television shows I didn't enjoy because I was too tired and too depressed to do anything else. But here in Dallas, time stretched out before me like an empty canvas. I could fill it with whatever I chose, explore whatever interested me, become whoever I wanted to be. The possibility was both thrilling and terrifying. Meanwhile, my phone had been ringing constantly. Isaac and Benjamin had discovered my letter and my disappearance, and they were not taking my independence well. I let every call go to voicemail, but I listened to their messages with a mixture of fascination and disgust. "Mom, this is Isaac. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to come home right now. Mela is very upset about this whole situation, and frankly, so am I. We're your family. You can't just disappear because you had some kind of emotional breakdown in the hospital. Call me back immediately." An emotional breakdown. That's how he characterized my decision to stop enabling their selfishness and start living for myself, not as a rational response to decades of neglect, but as some kind of mental health crisis that needed to be managed and contained. Benjamin's messages were even worse, veering between manipulation and outright threats. "Mom, Diana is pregnant, and you're going to miss out on knowing your grandchild if you keep acting like this. Is that really what you want, to punish an innocent baby because you're having some kind of midlife crisis? I know you're upset, but this is selfish even for you. Selfish even for me, as if my entire life hadn't been one long exercise in selflessness that had left me emotionally bankrupt and spiritually empty." After a week of constant calls, I finally answered the phone when Isaac's name appeared on the screen. "Thank God," he said before I could even say hello. "Mom, where are you?" "We've been worried sick." "No, you haven't," I said calmly. "You've been inconvenienced. There's a difference." "That's not fair. Of course we're worried. You're our mother." "Am I? Because mothers are supposed to be loved and respected and valued, and I haven't been any of those things to you in years." "Mom, I don't know where this is coming from, but you're being ridiculous. We love you. We've always loved you." "When?" I asked. "When have you loved me? When you couldn't be bothered to come to the hospital while I was dying, when you took my house money and never thanked me, when you let your wives treat me like an embarrassment at family gatherings." There was a long pause, and when Isaac spoke again, his voice had taken on the cold, professional tone he used with difficult clients. "Look, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this needs to stop. You're making everyone uncomfortable with this victim act, and it's not helping anyone." Victim act. 40 years of loving him with everything I had, and he saw my pain as performance art designed to manipulate him. "Isaac," I said, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me, "I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you because I'm only going to say it once. I am not your victim. I am not your problem. I am not your responsibility, and you are no longer mine. I'm done being your mother. You can't just stop being our mother. Watch me, I said and hung up. I turned off my phone after that, and Linda helped me get a new number that I didn't share with my sons. The silence that followed was profound and healing, like the quiet after a storm when you finally realize the danger has passed. How do you feel? Linda asked a few days later as we worked together in her garden, pulling weeds and watering the flowers that Robert had planted years before. Empty, I said, then realized that wasn't quite right. No, not empty, clean, like I've been carrying around something heavy and toxic for so long that I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. That's exactly what you've been doing, Linda said, deadheading a rose bush with practiced efficiency. You've been carrying their emotional baggage for 40 years, and now that you've put it down, you can finally see how much it was weighing you down. And working in the garden became my daily meditation, a way of connecting with something that grew and flourished when it was properly cared for. I had spent decades trying to nurture relationships that were fundamentally incompatible with love, pouring my energy into soil that was too poisoned to support healthy growth. But here, surrounded by Linda's flowers and vegetables, I could see the results of patient, consistent care given to things that were capable of thriving. I started volunteering at a local food bank, serving meals to families who were struggling to make ends meet. Many of the people I met there were dealing with their own family crises: adult children who had abandoned elderly parents, parents who had been rejected by children they had sacrificed everything to raise. The hardest part, said Maria, a 72-year-old woman whose son had stopped speaking to her after she refused to co-sign a loan for his gambling debts, is learning that loving someone doesn't mean they have to love you back. I spent so many years thinking that if I just loved him enough, gave him enough, forgave him enough, he would turn into the son I wanted him to be. Did it work? I asked, though I already knew the answer. It made him worse, she said sadly. Every time I rescued him, I taught him that he didn't have to face consequences for his choices. I thought I was being a good mother, but I was actually enabling him to become a bad person. Her words echoed conversations I had been having with myself for weeks. How many times had I rescued Isaac and Benjamin from the natural consequences of their selfishness? How many times had I smoothed their path, paid their bills, made excuses for their behavior, and taught them that other people existed to serve their needs? I had thought I was showing them unconditional love, but what I had actually been showing them was that love could be taken for granted, that sacrifice was expected rather than appreciated, and that some people existed solely to make other people's lives easier. I had been complicit in turning my own children into the kind of people who could leave their mother to die alone. One afternoon, while Linda and I were having lunch at a small cafe near her house, a young woman at the next table started crying into her cell phone. "Mom, please don't do this to me," she was saying, her voice rising with panic. "I know I haven't been the best daughter, but you can't just disappear. What am I supposed to tell people when they ask about you?" I felt Linda's eyes on me, but I kept staring at my salad, trying not to listen to a conversation that felt too familiar. "I don't care if you're hurt," the young woman continued. "You're being selfish and dramatic, and you're embarrassing me. People are asking questions, and I don't know what to say." The woman was worried about being embarrassed by her mother's absence, not about her mother's well-being. She was concerned about how the situation looked to other people, not about what had driven her mother to cut off contact. It was Isaac and Benjamin all over again. "Some people," Linda said quietly after the woman finished her call and left the cafe, "think love is something they're entitled to receive without ever having to give it in return." "I used to be that woman's mother," I said. "I used to be the one calling and begging and trying to convince my children that I mattered. And now I know that if you have to convince someone to love you, they don't actually love you at all." That evening, Linda and I were sitting on her front porch when a car pulled up to the curb. My heart stopped when I recognized the rental car and saw Isaac getting out of the driver's seat, followed by Benjamin. They had found me. "Stay inside," Linda said firmly, rising from her chair. with surprising speed for a 72-year-old woman. I'll handle this. But I stood up too, feeling something I hadn't experienced in decades, the complete absence of fear in the face of my children's anger. No, White, I said. This is my fight. I need to finish it. Isaac and Benjamin approached the porch with the confident stride of men who were accustomed to getting their way, but they stopped short when they saw the look on my face. Mom, Isaac said, his voice carefully controlled, we need to talk. We have nothing to talk about, I replied, not moving from my position on the porch. The hell we don't, Benjamin said, his composure cracking. You can't just disappear and expect us to be okay with it. We're your family. You're my former family, I corrected. I divorced you both when I walked out of that hospital room. You can't divorce your children, Isaac said, using the same tone he probably used to explain basic concepts to difficult clients. I can disown them, I said calmly. And I have. The word hung in the air between us like a weapon. Disowned. Final and irreversible, carrying the weight of legal and emotional severance. You don't mean that, Benjamin said, but his voice was uncertain now, as if he was beginning to realize that the woman standing on this porch was not the same woman who had spent 40 years absorbing their cruelty and asking for more. I mean every word of it, I said. You taught me that family is about more than blood. You taught me that love has to be earned and maintained and reciprocated. You taught me that I deserve better than what you were willing to give me. We came here to bring you home, Isaac said, playing what he thought was his trump card. We're willing to forgive you for this whole episode if you just come back with us right now. I started laughing, then a sound that surprised everyone, including myself. I laughed at the absurdity of grown men who thought they could forgive their mother for having the audacity to value herself. I laughed at the breathtaking arrogance of children who believed they could summon their discarded parent like a disobedient pet. You're willing to forgive me, I said when I finally stopped laughing. For what? For surviving 3 heart attacks that you couldn't be bothered to witness, for finally seeing you clearly after 40 years of delusion, for choosing to live the rest of my life around people who actually want me. Mom, you're being irrational, Benjamin said desperately. Diana's pregnant. Don't you want to know your grandchild? I want to know grandchildren who will be raised to love their family, not use them, I said. And based on what I've seen of your parenting philosophy so far, I don't think that's going to happen. Isaac stepped forward, his business mask finally slipping to reveal the anger underneath. Fine, he said coldly. If this is how you want to play it, don't come crying to us when you're old and sick and need help. Don't expect us to take care of you when you can't take care of yourself. I wouldn't dream of expecting anything from you, I said. You've already shown me exactly how much your mother's well-being matters to you. And they stood there for a long moment, apparently waiting for me to break down, to apologize, to return to my role as the convenient mother who could be ignored until she was needed. When it became clear that I wasn't going to bend, Isaac turned and walked back toward the car. This isn't over, Todd, he called back over his shoulder. You can't just erase us from your life. Watch me, I said for the second time in our relationship, and this time I meant it with every fiber of my being. Benjamin lingered for a moment longer, looking lost and young and almost vulnerable. Mom, he said quietly, I don't understand why you're doing this to us. I'm not doing anything to you, I said gently, feeling a moment of sadness for the little boy he had been before he became the selfish man he was now. I'm doing something for me. For the first time in my life, I'm putting myself first. But we're your children. You're grown men who happen to share my DNA, I corrected. My children would have come to the hospital when I was dying. My children would have loved me the way I loved them. You stopped being my children the moment you decided I was disposable. He stood there for another moment, perhaps waiting for me to soften, to take it all back, to return to the familiar pattern of his cruelty and my forgiveness. But I had nothing left to give him, no more chances, to offer no more hope, to invest in a relationship that had been bankrupt for years. Finally, he turned and walked back to the car where Isaac was waiting with the engine running and his phone pressed to his ear, probably already moving on to more important matters. They drove away without looking back, and I watched their taillights disappear around the corner with something that felt remarkably like relief. "Well," Linda said, coming to stand beside me, "that went better than I expected." "Did it?" "Honey, you just stood up to the people who have been controlling your life for 40 years, and you didn't back down for even a second. I'd say that's a pretty spectacular victory." She was right. For the first time in my relationship with my sons, I had held my ground completely. I hadn't apologized, hadn't made excuses, hadn't tried to salvage something that was beyond saving. I had simply told the truth and let them deal with the consequences. That night I slept better than I had in years, and when I woke up the next morning, I realized something profound had changed inside me. The constant ache of disappointment that had been my companion for decades was gone, replaced by something I barely recognized. It was hope. For the first time in decades, I woke up with hope instead of dread, with possibilities instead of obligations, with the strange and wonderful sensation that my life belonged entirely to me. The realization hit me as I sat in Linda's sunny kitchen, drinking coffee from a mug that said "World's Best Cousin" and watching hummingbirds dance outside the window. I was free, not just from my son's manipulations and demands, but from the prison I had built around myself with 40 years of misplaced loyalty and one-sided love. "You look different this morning," Linda said, setting down her own coffee and studying my face with the careful attention she usually reserved for her garden plants. "I feel different," I admitted. "I feel like I'm meeting myself for the first time." "And what do you think of her so far?" I considered the question seriously, taking inventory of the woman I was discovering beneath 4 decades of other people's expectations. "I think she's stronger than anyone ever gave her credit for," I said finally, "including herself." Over the following weeks, I began to explore what it meant to live entirely for my own pleasure and fulfillment. It started with small things, buying groceries based on what I wanted to eat rather than what I thought I should eat, spending entire afternoons reading books that interested me without feeling guilty about being unproductive, taking long walks through Linda's neighborhood simply because the exercise felt good and the trees were beautiful. These tiny acts of self-care felt revolutionary after a lifetime of self-denial. I joined Linda's church, not because I was particularly religious, but because the congregation was full of people who welcomed newcomers with genuine warmth and seemed to believe that community meant taking care of each other. The pastor, a woman named Reverend Sarah, who couldn't have been more than 40, preached sermons about finding your purpose later in life and the courage it takes to become who God intended you to be. "It's never too late to bloom," she said during one service, looking directly at me as if she knew my story. "Some of the most beautiful flowers don't open until they've weathered their harshest seasons." After the service, she sought me out during the coffee hour. "Cecilia, isn't it? Linda's cousin from Chicago." "Yes, ma'am." "How are you settling in? I know it can be challenging to start over in a new place." There was something in her eyes that suggested she understood more than casual politeness required, and I found myself telling her the abbreviated version of my story. Not the painful details, but the basic outline: children who had taken me for granted, a heart attack that had shown me my true worth to my family, a decision to choose myself for the first time in my adult life. "It sounds like you've been through a resurrection of sorts," Reverend Sarah said thoughtfully. "Death of the old self, rebirth into something new. That takes tremendous courage." "It doesn't feel courageous," I said, "and it feels like survival." "Sometimes those are the same thing." She invited me to join a support group the church ran for people dealing with major life transitions: divorce, death of a spouse, estrangement from family, career changes. I was hesitant at first, worried about sharing my story with strangers, but Linda encouraged me to try it. "Honey boo," she said, "you've been carrying this burden alone for 40 years. Maybe it's time to let some other people help you carry it." And the support group met every Tuesday evening in the church basement, a circle of folding chairs occupied by 8 people ranging in age from 35 to 79. There was Janet, whose husband of 34 years had left her for his dental hygienist. There was Marcus, a 52-year-old man whose teenage daughter refused to speak to him after his divorce from her mother. There was Eleanor, whose adult son had stolen her retirement savings and left her financially devastated at age 73. Each person's story was different, but the themes were achingly familiar: love that hadn't been returned, sacrifices that hadn't been appreciated, families that had become sources of pain instead of comfort. The hardest part, Eleanor said during my first meeting, is accepting that the people you loved most were capable of hurting you most. I kept thinking that if I could just explain to my son how much damage he'd done, he would feel remorse and make it right. But some people don't feel remorse. Some people just feel entitled. How did you get past that? I asked. I realized that his inability to feel guilt about what he'd done to me was actually a gift, Eleanor said with a sad smile. It freed me from the responsibility of trying to rehabilitate his conscience. I could just focus on rebuilding my own life. Over the months that followed, I learned that my story wasn't unique or particularly dramatic. There were millions of parents who had sacrificed everything for children who grew up to see those sacrifices as their due rather than their fortune. There were countless families where love flowed in only one direction until the giver was completely depleted and the takers moved on to more convenient sources of support. But I also learned that survival was possible, that starting over at any age was not only feasible, but often necessary for true happiness. Janet had gone back to school to become a massage therapist and discovered a talent for healing that she never knew she possessed. Marcus had started volunteering with disadvantaged youth and found that mentoring other people's children helped heal the wound left by his own daughter's rejection. Eleanor had moved into a senior community where she taught art classes and finally had time to pursue the painting she had always loved but never had time for when she was busy enabling her son's destructive behavior. The secret, Reverend Sarah told our group one evening, is learning to see endings as beginnings. When one door closes, you can either stand there banging on it forever, or you can turn around and discover all the other doors that have been waiting for you to notice them. I started noticing doors everywhere. The community college offered courses for seniors, and I enrolled in a class on creative writing, something I'd always been curious about but never had time to explore. The local animal shelter needed volunteers to walk dogs and socialize cats, work that felt meaningful in a way that retail never had. The botanical garden was looking for docents to give tours to school groups, a perfect use for my growing knowledge of plants and flowers. For the first time in my adult life, I was building an identity based on what I wanted to do rather than what other people needed me to do. The creative writing class was a revelation. Our instructor, Professor Martinez, no relation to Dr. Martinez from the hospital, was a published novelist who believed that everyone had at least one important story to tell. Your assignment for next week, she announced during our second class, is to write about a moment when your life changed completely. It can be dramatic or subtle, but it should be the moment when you became who you are today. I knew immediately what I would write about. Not the heart attacks, not the hospital, not even the confrontation with my sons on Linda's porch. I would write about the moment in that ambulance when I realized I was completely alone, because that was the moment I began the journey toward finding myself. The piece I wrote was raw and honest, probably too personal to share with a room full of strangers, but Professor Martinez had created an environment where vulnerability was valued more than polish. "This is powerful work, Cecilia," she said after I read it aloud to the class. "You've captured something universal about the experience of loving people who can't love you back. Have you considered expanding it into a longer piece? Like what? Like a memoir?" There are a lot of people out there dealing with family estrangement, trying to figure out when it's okay to walk away from toxic relationships. Your story could help them understand that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. The idea terrified and excited me in equal measure. Who was I to think my story was worth an entire book? But then again, who was I not to tell it if it might help someone else find the courage to escape their own prison of misplaced loyalty? I started writing every morning sitting at Linda's kitchen table with my coffee and my laptop, which she had insisted on buying for me as a birthday present. Every writer needs the right tools, she said when I protested that it was too expensive. Besides, I want to read this book when you finish it. The writing became my daily meditation, a way of processing not just what had happened to me, but what I had learned from it. I wrote about the warning signs I had ignored, the patterns I had enabled, the moments when I could have chosen differently but didn't have the courage or clarity to do so. But I also wrote about the healing that was possible when you finally stopped trying to get water from an empty well. I wrote about the community I had found in Dallas, the friendships that were based on mutual respect rather than obligation, the joy of discovering that I was capable of being loved for who I was rather than what I could provide. 6 months after arriving in Dallas, I received a call from an unknown number in Chicago. Against my better judgment, I answered it. Mrs. Rosewood. This is Dr. Martinez from Northwestern Memorial. I wanted to check on how you're doing. Dr. Martinez, I said, surprised to hear from him. I'm doing very well, thank you. How did you get this number? Your sons gave it to me. They've been calling the hospital regularly asking if I've heard from you. I hope you don't mind that I'm reaching out, but I wanted to make sure you were taking care of yourself. My sons had been calling the hospital. The image of Isaac and Benjamin frantically trying to track me down through medical records would have been satisfying if it weren't so pathetic. I'm taking very good care of myself, I told him. Better care than I've taken in years, actually. I'm glad to hear that. Your sons seem very concerned about your well-being. Dr. Martinez, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you remember that night when you called my sons to tell them I was dying? There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was careful. Yes, I remember. Do you remember what they said when you told them I might not make it through the night? Another pause, longer this time. Mrs. Rosewood, I'm not sure it's appropriate for me to... Please, I said. I need to know that I'm remembering it correctly. He sighed, and I could almost see him weighing his professional obligations against his human instincts. They said they couldn't leave their social obligations, he said finally, both of them. I told them you were dying, and they said they couldn't leave their parties. And now they're calling the hospital regularly, worried about my well-being. Yes. Dr. Martinez, does that seem genuine to you? Does that seem like the behavior of children who are truly concerned about their mother? Mrs. Rosewood, he said carefully, in my professional opinion, people who are genuinely concerned about someone's well-being make time for that person when they're needed most. Your sons had their chance to show you how much you mattered to them, and they chose not to take it. His words validated everything I had felt but been afraid to trust. Even a stranger could see what I had been too loyal to acknowledge. My sons didn't actually care about me. They cared about controlling me, about maintaining their image as good sons, about keeping me available for their convenience. But they didn't care about me as a person with feelings and needs of my own. Thank you for being honest with me, I said. Mrs. Rosewood, can I ask you something now? Of course. Are you happy? Are you living the life you want to be living? I looked around Linda's kitchen where I had been writing my memoir at a table covered with flowers from the garden we tended together. Through the window, I could see neighbors working in their yards, children playing in the street, hummingbirds visiting the feeders that had become one of my greatest simple pleasures. Yes, I said, surprised by how easily the word came. I'm happier than I've been in 40 years. Then you made the right choice, he said simply. Take care of yourself, Mrs. Rosewood, and thank you for teaching me something about the difference between being alone and being abandoned. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time thinking about the woman I had been when I first met Dr. Martinez and the woman I had become in the months since. The transformation felt miraculous, like being reborn at 67 into a life that was actually my own. Linda found me there an hour later, still lost in thought. "You look like someone who just received good news," she said, settling into the chair across from me with her own cup of coffee. "I think I did," I said, and told her about the conversation with Dr. Martinez. "Well, of course you're happier," Linda said when I finished. "You're finally living with people who want you around instead of people who tolerate you when it's convenient." "Linda, can I ask you something that might sound strange?" "Shoot. Do you think I'm a different person now than I was when I first arrived here?" She considered the question seriously, studying my face as if she were cataloging the changes. "Yes and no," she said finally. "I think the core of who you are, the kindness, the strength, the intelligence that was always there, but you were buried under so much pain and self-doubt that it was hard to see. What's different now is that you're not trying to be small enough to fit into other people's expectations. You're finally taking up the space you were always meant to occupy." Taking up space. What a concept. For 40 years, I had tried to make myself smaller, quieter, more convenient, less demanding. I had apologized for having needs, for taking up time, for existing in ways that might inconvenience other people. But here in Dallas, surrounded by people who valued my presence instead of enduring it, I was learning to take up exactly the amount of space I needed, no more, but certainly no less. The memoir was taking shape, growing from a personal catharsis into something that might actually help other people recognize the difference between love and manipulation, between family loyalty and self-destruction. Professor Martinez had connected me with a local writers group where I shared chapters and received feedback from other people who were telling their own difficult stories. "This is important work, said James, a retired teacher who was writing about his experience coming out to his conservative family at age 65. "There are so many people trapped in relationships that are slowly killing their spirits, and they need to know that escape is possible." "But is it selfish?" asked Maria, whose memoir dealt with leaving her abusive husband after 30 years of marriage. "Are we wrong to put ourselves first when it means hurting our families?" "The question," said our group leader, a published author named Patricia, "is whether your families are actually hurt by your decision to value yourself or just inconvenienced by losing their source of convenient support. There's a difference between causing genuine harm and refusing to participate in your own destruction." The distinction was crucial, and it helped me understand why I felt no guilt about my decision to disappear from my sons' lives. I hadn't hurt them by leaving, I had simply stopped allowing them to hurt me. They weren't grieving the loss of their beloved mother. They were annoyed by the loss of their convenient resource. A year after arriving in Dallas, I received a letter forwarded from my old address in Chicago. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and the return address showed a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a formal notice informing me that my son Benjamin Rosewood was filing a lawsuit seeking to have me declared mentally incompetent and placed under a conservatorship that would give him control over my finances and medical decisions. The letter listed his concerns: my sudden departure from Chicago without informing family members, my refusal to maintain contact with my children, my erratic behavior in cutting off relationships with people who cared about me. It painted a picture of an elderly woman who had suffered some kind of mental breakdown and was now living under the influence of people who might be taking advantage of her diminished capacity. I read the letter 3 times, feeling a mixture of outrage and something that might have been admiration for the sheer audacity of it. Benjamin, who had ignored me for years, was now claiming to be so concerned about my well-being that he needed legal authority to control my life. The son who couldn't be bothered to visit me in the hospital was now worried that I might be making poor decisions about my own care. "Linda," I called out, my voice shaking with anger, "you need to see this." She read the letter over my shoulder, her face growing darker with each paragraph. "Well," she said when she finished, "I guess we know why they've been so persistent about trying to find you. They're not worried about your mental health, they're worried about your money. What money? I barely have $3,000 to my name. Honey, think about it. You sold your house and gave the money to Isaac, then gave Benjamin your life savings for his business. As far as they know, you might have other assets hidden away somewhere, or maybe they're worried that you'll leave whatever you have to someone else when you die. The realization hit me like cold water. My sons weren't trying to save me from some imagined mental illness. They were trying to ensure that they would inherit whatever I might have left, even if it wasn't much. The conservatorship would give Benjamin legal control over my finances and the authority to make decisions about my care in old age. They wanted to own me legally and completely. What do I do? I asked Linda, feeling panic rising in my chest. First, you call a lawyer. Then you document everything that proves you're mentally competent and living a healthy, productive life. And then you fight this with everything you've got, because this isn't just about money. It's about your right to exist as an independent human being. The lawyer Linda recommended was a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Chen, who specialized in elder law and had seen this kind of family manipulation before. Unfortunately, this is becoming more common, she explained during our first meeting. Adult children who have been financially dependent on their parents sometimes panic when the parents start setting boundaries or making independent choices. They file for conservatorship as a way to regain control. But I'm not mentally incompetent, I protested. I'm living independently, making rational decisions, taking care of myself better than I have in years. I can see that, Ms. Chen said, making notes on a legal pad. But the burden of proof will be on us to demonstrate your competency to the court. Tell me about your life here in Dallas. What does a typical day look like for you? I told her about my writing, my volunteer work, my participation in church and community activities. I showed her letters from Professor Martinez praising my memoir testimonials from the animal shelter about my reliability as a volunteer, documentation of my involvement in Linda's book club, and my support group. This is exactly what we need, Ms. Chen said, reviewing the materials I had brought. You're not just competent, you're thriving. The challenge will be getting the court in Illinois to see that, since that's where your son filed the petition. The legal battle took months, during which I had to submit to psychological evaluations, financial assessments, and interviews with court-appointed investigators who flew to Dallas to assess my living situation. It was humiliating and exhausting, but it was also clarifying in a way I hadn't expected. Every evaluation confirmed what I already knew: I was a mentally competent adult who was living independently and making rational decisions about her life. The psychologist who interviewed me spent 3 hours asking about my decision to move to Dallas, my relationships with Linda and my new community, and my reasons for cutting off contact with my sons. In my professional opinion, she wrote in her report, Mrs. Rosewood is not only mentally competent, but appears to be experiencing significant psychological improvement as a result of the life changes she has made. Her decision to relocate and establish new social connections shows excellent judgment and healthy coping strategies. The court hearing was held via video conference, with me appearing from Ms. Chen's office in Dallas while Benjamin and his lawyer appeared in a Chicago courtroom. I hadn't seen my son's face in over a year, and I was struck by how much older he looked, how the stress of trying to control me had apparently taken its toll on his own well-being. Your Honor, Benjamin's lawyer began, we are here today because of serious concerns about Mrs. Rosewood's mental state and her vulnerability to potential exploitation. She has exhibited erratic behavior, including sudden relocation, cessation of contact with family members, and what appears to be social isolation. Ms. Chen's response was swift and devastating. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mrs. Rosewood is not isolated, but has built a rich, supportive community in Dallas. She is not mentally impaired, but is thriving in ways she was unable to do while being emotionally abused by the very family members who now claim to be concerned about her well-being. The hearing lasted 4 hours. during which I was required to answer questions about my daily routine, my financial management, and my decision-making process. I spoke clearly and calmly about my new life, my reasons for leaving Chicago, and my determination to live independently. When Benjamin took the stand to explain his concerns about my mental health, Ms. Chen cross-examined him with surgical precision. Mr. Rosewood, when your mother was hospitalized with multiple heart attacks, did you visit her immediately? Well, no, but in fact, you refused to leave a birthday party even when told she might die that night, correct? It was complicated. Well, yes or no? Mr. Rosewood, did you refuse to come to the hospital when your mother was dying? A long pause. Yes. And in the years since your mother moved to Dallas, how many times have you attempted to visit her or invite her to visit you? We tried to call. I asked about visits, Mr. Rosewood. How many times have you made an effort to see your mother in person to assess her well-being? Another pause. We went to Dallas once. And what was the purpose of that visit? Were you checking on her health and happiness? We were trying to convince her to come home. I see. And when she declined to return to Chicago, did you respect her decision as a competent adult? Benjamin's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. She was being unreasonable. So your response to your mother's reasonable decision to live where she chooses was to file a petition claiming she was mentally incompetent. We were worried, Mr. Rosewood. Are you aware that your mother has published several pieces of writing since moving to Dallas, that she volunteers regularly at local charities, that she maintains an active social calendar, and has formed meaningful friendships? No, I wasn't aware of that. Are you aware that every mental health professional who has evaluated your mother has found her to be not only competent, but thriving in her current environment? No. In fact, Mr. Rosewood, isn't it true that your concern about your mother's mental health began only after she stopped providing financial support for your lifestyle? That's not. You received $25,000 from your mother for a failed business venture, correct money she couldn't afford to lose. Yes, but I intended to pay her back. And have you paid her back? Not yet, but so you took your elderly mother's life savings, lost it in a business failure, never repaid her, and then filed a lawsuit claiming she was mentally incompetent when she decided to move away from the family that had financially exploited her. Is that an accurate summary, Mr. Rosewood? By the time Ms. Chen finished with him, Benjamin looked like a man who wished he had never filed the petition. The judge's ruling was swift and unambiguous. The petition for conservatorship was denied, and Benjamin was ordered to pay my legal fees. Mrs. Rosewood, the judge said directly to me through the video connection, you are clearly a competent adult who has made thoughtful decisions about your life. The court finds no evidence of mental impairment or any need for outside intervention in your affairs. I hope you continue to thrive in your new community. When the video conference ended, I sat in Ms. Chen's office and cried tears of relief and vindication. Not only had I won the legal battle, but I had done so decisively with a public record that would make it difficult for my sons to challenge my competency again. How do you feel? Ms. Chen asked, handing me tissues from a box that had probably seen a lot of similar tears. Free, I said, completely, finally free. That evening, Linda and I celebrated with dinner at our favorite restaurant, surrounded by friends from church and my writing group who had supported me throughout the legal ordeal. A toast, said Reverend Sarah, raising her glass of wine to Cecilia, who had the courage to save herself and the wisdom to build a life worth living. As I looked around the table at these people who had chosen to love me without conditions or expectations, I realized that I had accomplished something I never thought possible. I had created a real family, not a family bound by blood or obligation, but a family bound by genuine care and mutual respect. These people celebrated my victories, supported me through my challenges, and valued my presence in their lives. They didn't love me because they had to, but because they wanted to. They didn't see me as a resource to be exploited, but as a person to be cherished. At 68 years old, I finally understood what family was supposed to feel like. 2 years later, my memoir was published by a small press that specialized in books about personal transformation and family healing. The book, titled Learning to Choose Myself, found its way to readers who recognized their own stories in my words and wrote to tell me how it had helped them find the courage to value themselves. "Your book saved my life," wrote a woman named Patricia from Oregon. "I was trapped in the same pattern with my daughter and son-in-law, giving everything and getting nothing but criticism in return. Reading about your journey helped me understand that walking away wasn't giving up, it was growing up." The letters came from all over the country from people who had been struggling with the same questions that had tortured me for decades. When is it okay to stop trying? How do you know the difference between temporary conflict and permanent toxicity? Is it selfish to choose your own well-being over family harmony? My story had become larger than just my story. It had become a roadmap for anyone who needed permission to save themselves from the people who were supposed to love them. On my 70th birthday, Linda threw me a party in her backyard, stringing lights through the trees and inviting everyone who had become part of my chosen family over the past 5 years. There were people from church, from my writing group, from the animal shelter where I still volunteered twice a week. There were neighbors who had become friends and friends who had become sisters. As I looked around at the faces illuminated by the soft glow of the party lights, I felt something I had never experienced in 7 decades of living complete contentment. Not the fragile happiness that depends on other people's behavior, but the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong with people who genuinely want you there. "Make a wish," Linda said, presenting me with a cake decorated with 70 candles and the words, "Happy birthday, beloved friend." And I closed my eyes and thought about what I could possibly wish for when I already had everything I had ever really wanted: people who loved me, work that fulfilled me, and the hard-won knowledge that I was worthy of good things. But then I knew what my wish would be: that every person trapped in relationships that diminished their spirit would find the courage to choose themselves the way I had finally learned to choose myself. I blew out the candles to enthusiastic applause from my chosen family, and as the smoke drifted up into the Texas sky, I felt the profound peace that comes from knowing you are finally truly home. The woman who had nearly died alone in a Chicago hospital was gone, replaced by someone who would never be alone again because she had learned the secret that had eluded her for 70 years. The people who are meant to love you will choose to love you, and the people who don't choose you were never yours to begin with. At 70, I was finally living the life I was meant to live, surrounded by the family I was meant to have, free from the burden of trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. I was Cecilia Rosewood, and I was home at last.